Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen heart of Canada's forgotten small towns, through isolated communities, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories ever reported from these quiet regions. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people, men and women, whose lives were permanently altered by what they experienced. From abandoned farmhouses to basements hiding unspeakable secrets, from disappearances that defy explanation to things that should never exist. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Canada's small towns, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Evan Mercer, and this happened to me when I was 29 years old. During the winter, I moved to a small town in northern Ontario called Blackwood Falls. I didn't come looking for trouble. I came because I needed quiet, distance from a life that had collapsed too loudly in the city. Blackwood Falls looked peaceful at first. Snow-covered streets, old wooden houses, and a river frozen so thick it felt permanent. The people were polite, but guarded. Conversations ended quickly. Smiles never reached their eyes. I rented a basement apartment beneath an elderly couple, the Hargreaves. Cheap rent, no questions asked. That should have been my first warning. The first night, I noticed something strange. No matter how late it was, the town never felt asleep. Lights stayed on, curtains twitched, and every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate pacing, followed by a sound like furniture being dragged across the floor. When I asked Mrs. Hargreaves about it, she froze. Her face went pale, and she whispered, "You shouldn't be awake at that hour." That night, I stayed awake on purpose. At 2:17 a.m., the footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door, and something began to knock from the inside. I froze, staring at the door, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The knocking continued. 3 slow, heavy taps, then a pause, then another 3. It wasn't a person moving. It sounded deliberate, mechanical almost, like something testing boundaries. I wanted to call the Hargreaves, but my phone had no signal. That's when I noticed the temperature drop. The air in my basement apartment went icy cold, and my breath fogged in front of me. Summoning courage, I got up and approached the door. Every step felt heavier, as if the floor itself resisted me. I pressed my ear against the wood, and a whisper came through, a voice I didn't recognize, low and raspy, saying, "Leave, before it finds you." I stumbled back, gasping. My apartment felt wrong, like the shadows had weight and intention. The lights flickered violently, plunging me into darkness for a few terrifying seconds. When they came back on, I saw something impossible. Faint footprints in the thin layer of frost on my basement floor, leading directly from the stairs to my bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. Outside, the town seemed quiet. But inside, something had already entered, something that didn't belong. The following days were worse. Every time I left my apartment, I felt eyes on me. Cold, calculating, patient. People in town smiled politely, but avoided my gaze. The Hargreaves were quiet, almost unreadable. When I asked them about the footsteps, Mrs. Hargreaves only shook her head and whispered, "Some things in Blackwood Falls are old. They remember." I didn't understand at first, but I began seeing signs everywhere. Strange symbols carved into the wooden posts of houses, doors slightly ajar despite everyone being inside, and shadows moving against the light in ways that defied physics. I started keeping a journal, recording every sound, every movement. That night, the knocking returned, louder and faster. But this time, it came with scratching. Sharp, dragging noises across the walls, almost like claws tearing through plaster. My hands shook as I reached for a baseball bat I had bought for protection. Every nerve screamed at me to leave, but I needed to understand what was happening. Something was watching me, learning my routines. And as I lay awake, I realized that the town itself seemed alive, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. One evening, curiosity overpowered fear. I ventured out toward the edge of town, past the frozen river and into the forest that locals avoided. The trees were dense, their branches scratching the sky like skeletal fingers. A strange fog hung low to the ground, glowing faintly under the moonlight. I followed a narrow path I hadn't noticed before, marked by the same cryptic symbols I had seen on the houses. The deeper I went, the louder my heartbeat became. Then I saw it, a small abandoned cabin, lights flickering inside as if someone had been there very recently. My instincts screamed to turn back, but I approached anyway. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, portraits of townspeople, some familiar, some unknown. And in every picture, someone had crossed out eyes, carved violently with ink or scratch marks. A chill ran down my spine. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. No one was there, but the smell of damp earth and decay was overpowering. I realized then that the town didn't just watch, it collected. It marked its people, and I had already drawn its attention. After that night, I couldn't return to the apartment. I stayed at a small inn on the outskirts, but even there, the unease followed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of the cabin, the scratched faces, and the shadows that seemed to linger just beyond the edge of vision. The town felt like a predator, circling silently. I tried talking to a few locals about what I had seen, but every attempt ended in cold stares and tight-lipped warnings. No one would speak. Then came the sounds. Not footsteps this time, but whispers. Soft, indecipherable murmurs drifting through the streets at night, echoing off the wooden walls of empty houses. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find small objects moved, furniture slightly shifted, as if invisible hands were rearranging the world around me. I started leaving notes, marking the changes, trying to prove to myself that it wasn't a dream. But the notes disappeared. One evening, a single light appeared in my inn window, dim, flickering, and impossibly close. I opened the door to see nothing. Only the footprints of someone or something trailing into the snow, leading back toward the town I was supposed to escape. I realized I had to understand the town's secret or it would consume me. I returned to Blackwood Falls during the day, blending in as if nothing had happened. But the streets were unnervingly silent. Houses stood empty, doors ajar, and the cryptic symbols seemed to pulse faintly, almost alive. I followed one path leading to the edge of the river and noticed fresh footprints in the snow, leading toward a frozen pier I had never seen before. The pier creaked under my weight. At the end, an old rowboat bobbed slightly, tethered to the dock. Inside were more photographs, this time of me, some taken from a distance, some close enough to see my fear in the frames. A soft whisper rose from the river, carrying words I couldn't fully understand. As I leaned closer to the boat, A shadow emerged from the fog behind me. A tall, indistinct figure with eyes glowing faintly orange. I froze, heart hammering. Its gaze seemed to pierce my mind. And then it spoke, a voice layered with countless others. "You've seen too much. You belong now." I ran. I didn't stop until the town disappeared behind the trees. But even miles away, I could feel it. Watching, waiting, marking me as its own. I thought leaving the town would save me. I drove for hours through snow-choked roads, past forests that seemed to stretch endlessly. But wherever I went, I felt the same weight of unseen eyes, the same oppressive feeling pressing against my chest. Every time I stopped at a gas station or a diner, the townspeople I passed were the same faces I had seen in Blackwood Falls. Their eyes glinted with recognition, and their lips twitched into knowing smiles. That night, I stayed in a motel far from civilization, hoping distance would erase the fear. I tried to sleep, but the whispers returned, soft, undulating, rising from beneath the floorboards, seeping through the walls. I could hear faint scratching at the windows, slow and deliberate, like claws testing the glass. I grabbed my coat and ran outside. Snow fell in heavy flakes, muffling the world. Yet the whispers seemed louder now, almost desperate, almost angry. And then I saw it. A shadow moving through the falling snow, impossibly fast, always just beyond the reach of my headlights. It stopped, turned, and stared. The glowing eyes burned into my soul, and I understood. Leaving Blackwood Falls didn't matter. Once it chose you, it followed. I returned to the town. I didn't know why, but I had no choice. Blackwood Falls had marked me, and the only way to survive was to confront it. I sneaked through the streets at night, following the footprints that seemed to appear wherever I stepped. The Hargreaves house stood at the center, windows glowing faintly, as if calling me. Inside, the air was thick, warm in contrast to the frozen streets outside. The basement door creaked open on its own. Inside, the shadows pulsed and twisted, forming shapes I could barely comprehend. Figures emerged. People I had seen in town, frozen in unnatural poses, eyes hollowed, expressions twisted in silent screams. And at the center, a tall figure with glowing eyes stared at me, silent but commanding. I understood. This town was alive. It fed on fear, on attention, on curiosity. Every story, every person became part of it. I stumbled back, and the shadows recoiled slightly, but the whispers followed. "Stay, or join us." The town itself seemed to breathe, closing in. I ran again, this time carrying knowledge I wish I never had. That Blackwood Falls never lets go, and anyone who enters becomes a page in its living nightmare. I barely survived the night, stumbling out of the basement into the snowy streets. The town was alive in ways I could no longer ignore. Every house, every shadow, every sound seemed part of a single, watching entity. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, voices overlapping, pressing into my mind. I tried to run, but the footprints I had been following led me back toward the Hargreaves house, as if the town itself had a plan. Through the frosted windows, I saw them. Figures moving inside. Frozen in unnatural ways, their faces twisted, eyes reflecting the pale light of lamps. The Hargreaves weren't human anymore. Their bodies shifted like smoke, their eyes glowing faintly. And when they spoke, it wasn't with their voices. It was the chorus of the entire town. "You are ours now. You cannot leave." I froze, terror rooting me to the spot. The snow swirled, carrying their whispers closer, pressing the cold into my chest. I realized then that I had been naive. The town didn't just haunt its victims, It claimed them, and no distance, no escape, could sever its hold once you were marked. I awoke the next morning, not in a motel, not in my apartment, but on the frozen river outside Blackwood Falls. My memory of the previous night was fragmented, like a bad dream stitched together with panic. The town was silent, eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. Yet when I looked down, I saw faint footprints circling me in the snow, my own, but twisted, unnatural, as if another presence had walked with me while I slept. I left immediately, never stopping, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. But sometimes, in reflective windows or in the shadows of abandoned cabins, I catch glimpses of them, figures with glowing eyes, frozen faces, and the faint echo of whispers. Blackwood Falls didn't forget. Blackwood Falls didn't forgive. Years later, I still feel its mark. I can't stay in one place for long. The shadows follow me. And I know, deep down, that if I ever returned, I wouldn't leave. The town doesn't just watch. It waits, it learns, and it devours the curious. Blackwood Falls is alive, and I am one of its stories. My name is Daniel Rowe, and this happened to me when I was 34 years old, during a solo delivery run through northern Manitoba. I'd been a long-haul truck driver for nearly a decade, and I thought I understood empty roads. But Highway 627 wasn't empty. It was erased. The GPS lost signal the moment I turned onto it. Radio stations dissolved into static, then into voices whispering half-sentences that didn't belong to any language I knew. The forest closed in tight on both sides, black spruce leaning inward like they were listening. I passed the same rusted mile marker 3 times. I know because it was bent at the top, shot through with a single bullet hole. Each time, my watch ticked forward, but the sky never changed. Dusk stayed frozen, stretched thin like it didn't know how to end. I stopped at a pull-off to calm myself. That's when I saw the carvings on the trees, names, dates, and simple messages cut deep into the bark. I turned around. I never left. Then I found my own name, fresh, bleeding sap, carved at eye level, by hands that were shaking exactly like mine. I laughed when I saw my name. Not because it was funny, but because panic needed somewhere to go. I told myself it was a prank, a coincidence, exhaustion playing tricks on me. Long drives did that, isolation did that. But the forest felt wrong. Too quiet. No wind, no birds. Even the engine sounded muffled, like the sound was being swallowed before it could travel. I checked the truck's dash cam. The footage showed me driving straight, no turns, no stops, just endless road. But the timestamp reset every 17 minutes, over and over. When I got back on the highway, the trees had moved closer. I know that sounds impossible, but the shoulder was narrower, the branches closer to the mirrors. Scratches appeared along the side of the trailer, thin and deliberate, as if something was keeping pace with me, just out of sight. Then the radio clicked on by itself. A man's voice came through, calm and tired. If you can hear this, don't stop. Don't turn around. And whatever you do, don't follow the headlights. Ahead of me, in the distance, a single pair of headlights flickered to life, parked dead center in my lane. They weren't getting closer, but I was. I slowed down as the headlights grew clearer, my foot hovering over the brake, even though every instinct screamed not to stop. The truck's beams finally reached the other vehicle, and my stomach dropped. There was no car, no truck, just headlights floating at windshield height, swaying gently like they were breathing. The radio hissed again. The same man's voice returned, strained now, as if speaking through pain. That's where you end up if you follow them. Just light and memory, nothing else. The headlights blinked. For a split second, they reflected something behind them. Faces, dozens of them, pressed together in the dark like reflections in broken glass. I swerved hard, barely missing the lights. The moment they slipped past my window, the cab filled with cold. Frost bloomed across the inside of the windshield, crawling outward from the glass like veins. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts. When I checked the side mirror, the headlights were gone. In their place, I saw my own truck behind me, following too closely. Same dents, same company logo, same trailer number. I sped up. So did it. And in the mirror, I watched myself gripping the wheel, eyes wide with terror, mouthing words I couldn't hear, but somehow already knew. The road split without warning. No signs, no markings, just two identical lanes peeling away from each other like a wound opening in the asphalt. My GPS screamed, literally screamed, before going black. I chose left. The truck behind me chose right. For the first time since entering Highway 627, I felt hope. It was brief. The forest on my side thinned, revealing an old roadside diner glowing warm and yellow against the darkness. The sign flickered. Last Stop Cafe. I pulled in, ignoring the voice in my head telling me this was still part of the road's trick. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and ozone. A woman sat alone at the counter, stirring an empty mug. She looked up slowly and smiled with tired eyes. "You made it farther than most," she said. I asked her how to get out. Her smile faded. She glanced at the window where my truck sat idling. "You don't," she whispered. "You just decide which version of you gets to leave." Outside, the other truck rolled into the parking lot and shut its engine off. Through the glass, I watched myself step down from the cab, stretch, and walk calmly toward the diner door, wearing a look of relief I hadn't felt yet. The bell above the entrance began to ring, and there was nowhere left to hide. The diner door opened, and the bell rang once, sharp and final. The version of me from the other truck stepped inside, shaking snow from his jacket like he'd just finished a long, satisfying drive. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the counter and sat beside the woman, who poured him coffee without asking. I backed away slowly, my heel bumping into a booth. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might tear free. The woman finally looked at me again. "You're running out of time," she said gently. I demanded to know what she meant. She gestured to the window. Outside, my truck's headlights flickered. The engine sputtered, then steadied, like it was being tested by unfamiliar hands. "The road keeps what hesitates," she said. "It lets go of what decides." The other me finally turned. His eyes were calmer than mine, clearer, rested. "I've been driving a long time," he said. "I'm tired." I realized then that this place wasn't about distance or direction. It was about exhaustion, about the moment when your will weakens just enough for something else to take over and keep going. The bell rang again. The woman slid a set of keys across the counter, my keys. Only one of us reached for them. I grabbed the keys. The moment my fingers closed around them, the diner shuddered like it had been struck by a sudden gust of wind. The lights flickered violently, and the woman let out a long, exhausted sigh. "So be it," she said. The other me stood up fast, knocking his chair backward. For the first time, his calm cracked. "You don't know what it's like to keep driving," he snapped. "You'll come back, everyone does." I ran. The bells screamed as I burst through the door, the sound stretching unnaturally long behind me. Snow whipped sideways now, thick and blinding. The forest pressed closer to the lot, branches bending inward like arms reaching. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door just as hands struck the side of the truck, hard enough to dent the metal. The engine roared to life on the first try. In the side mirror, I saw the diner collapse inward on itself, folding like a cardboard set being packed away. The woman stood alone in the darkness, watching without expression. The road ahead finally showed a sign. Exit. 2 kilometers behind me, in the mirror, the other truck waited at the edge of the trees, headlights off. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back again. The exit sign vanished the moment I passed beneath it. One blink, it was there. The next, the road stretched on endlessly, unmarked and unfamiliar. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, panic roaring back stronger than before. The forest thinned again, revealing a small service station ahead. Only 2 pumps. No signage. No lights except one buzzing fluorescent tube that flickered like it was about to die. I told myself this one was real. I needed it to be real. A man stood beside the pumps, bundled in a heavy parka. His face was half hidden by shadow, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "You took the keys," he said. "That means you chose to keep being you." I asked him how many others made it out. He hesitated. "Enough to leave stories behind," he replied. "Not enough to be believed." He pointed at my trailer. Carved into the metal were shallow scratches, names layered over each other, hundreds deep. Some were crossed out, some weren't. He warned me that the road doesn't forget, that once it learns your rhythm, it waits for the moment you're tired again. As I pulled away, he added quietly, "Check your mirrors at sunrise." I wish I hadn't listened. Dawn finally broke as the forest loosened its grip. The sky turned pale gray, and the road widened into something almost normal. I let myself believe it was over, that I'd escaped. Then I checked the mirror. The trailer door was slightly open. I knew it had been sealed. I pulled over, heart pounding, and stepped out into the cold morning air. Inside the trailer, everything was exactly as it should have been. Cargo strapped tight, no sign of damage. Except for the far wall. Carved into the metal in deep, jagged letters was a single sentence. "I'm still driving." Beneath it was a fresh name. Not scratched, not faded. Daniel Rowe. Behind me, the engine idled on its own. The cab door creaked open slowly, invitingly. I felt the pull again, that bone-deep exhaustion, that promise of rest if I just let go. I slammed the trailer shut and drove until my hands went numb. Even now, years later, whenever I pass a long stretch of empty road at dusk, my radio clicks on by itself, and a voice that sounds exactly like mine whispers, "Don't stop. Don't turn around. I've got it from here." I crossed the provincial border just after sunrise, a real sign this time. I pulled into a rest area crowded with ordinary people, families, commuters, truckers half asleep with coffee in their hands. I sat there for almost an hour, watching them move, talk, laugh, just to remind myself the world still worked the way it was supposed to. When I finally checked my phone, dozens of notifications flooded in at once. Missed calls, messages, all sent during the hours I'd been lost on Highway 627. According to the timestamps, I'd only been gone for 23 minutes. But my logbook told a different story. Entire pages were filled with my handwriting, routes I didn't remember taking, towns that don't exist, dates written and crossed out again and again. The last entry ended mid-sentence, the pen digging so hard it tore the paper. That's when a truck pulled in beside mine. Same model, same color, different company logo. The driver climbed out slowly and glanced at me with recognition flickering across his face. "You too?" he asked quietly. We didn't need to explain. We just nodded. As he walked away, I noticed something carved into the side of his trailer. My name, crossed out. I quit long-haul trucking 3 months later. I told people it was stress, burnout, bad sleep. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Some nights, I still wake up with my hands curled like they're gripping a steering wheel. I feel motion even when the bed is still. And every so often, when I'm driving a quiet road at dusk, my GPS flickers and recalculates a route I didn't ask for. I never follow it. But I've started noticing new scars along the highways, names carved into guardrails, mile markers bent at odd angles, messages scratched into rest-stop bathroom stalls. I turned around. It didn't let me go. Last week, my radio crackled to life while I was stuck in traffic. A familiar voice came through, calm and steady. "Still driving," it said. "Still waiting." I turned the radio off, but the sound didn't stop. It followed me all the way home, humming beneath the silence like an engine idling just outside. Some roads don't erase you all at once. They let a part of you escape. So the rest knows exactly where to find its way back. My name is Liam Caldwell, and this happened to me when I was 31 years old. The winter I took a caretaking job in a dying mining town in northern Quebec. The place was called Rivière Noire, and by the time I arrived, fewer than 40 people still lived there. Most houses were abandoned, left to rot beneath the snow. I was hired to watch over one of them. The Dubois house sat at the edge of town, pressed up against the forest like it was trying to disappear into it. The owners had vanished years earlier, and the municipality just wanted someone to keep vandals out until spring. Easy money. Too easy. From the first night, I felt watched. Not threatened, observed. The windows reflected more than they should have. Shadows lingered even when the lights were on. And every time I moved through the house, the floorboards creaked after I stepped, not before, like something was copying me a half-second too late. The locals avoided the place. When I mentioned the address at the diner, conversation died instantly. One old man finally muttered, "That house doesn't like being alone." That night, I found a notebook on the kitchen table. It wasn't mine. On the first page, written in neat, careful handwriting, were the words, "Don't let it learn you." I tried to convince myself the notebook was left by a previous caretaker. People scared themselves in isolated places all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was listening while I read. The notebook documented routines. Times the writer woke up, where they stood, which rooms they avoided. Notes filled the margins in frantic ink. It watches patterns. It mimics habits. Change something every day. That night, I deliberately broke routine. I slept on the couch instead of the bedroom. I left lights on. I moved furniture just to hear the sound. The house responded with silence so complete, my ears rang. At exactly 1:44 a.m., the power cut out. Not a blackout, just the house. Outside, the town's lights still glowed faintly through the trees. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow. Careful. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering, telling myself it was thermal expansion, old wood, anything but what it sounded like. The steps paused above me. A floorboard creaked directly over my head, and a voice whispered from the darkness, using my own tone perfectly. "Liam, you forgot your room." I spent the next day on edge. Every shadow feeling alive, every creak and groan amplified. I avoided the bedroom entirely, sleeping on the couch, eating cold food from the fridge, and keeping all lights on. Even so, I caught glimpses of movement from the corner of my eyes. Furniture slightly shifted, objects I was sure I hadn't touched. By evening, I realized the house had learned me. Doors I left open were closed when I returned. The old grandfather clock, broken for years, now ticked in sync with my heart. And then the whispers began. Soft, repeated phrases that sounded exactly like me, calling me by name, asking questions I hadn't asked aloud. I tried to leave. I told myself a walk in the snow would calm my nerves. But when I stepped outside, the trees were lined with footprints. Not mine. Mine followed a different path entirely. These prints circled the house and led back to the front door. When I returned, the notebook was open on the kitchen table. New entries had appeared overnight, in handwriting identical to mine, noting everything I had done. 1:44 a.m. Stayed on couch. 2:05 a.m. Opened fridge. 2:17 a.m. Listened to whispers. The house wasn't just observing anymore. It was recording. That night, I tried a new tactic. I spoke to the house. I walked through each room, naming objects, acknowledging their presence, repeating my own habits out loud to show them I was aware. It didn't respond immediately. The house was patient. At 2 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the dark. I heard the soft scraping of nails along walls. By 2:17 a.m., the footsteps returned. Not above me this time, but below, inside the floor. Each step seemed deliberate, pausing when I paused, following me as I moved from room to room. Then the lights flickered back on. I froze. The living room mirror no longer reflected the room as it was. Instead, I saw myself standing still, but the walls shifted, crooked, distorted. The reflection's eyes were wide open, staring through me. A single word appeared on the mirror, written in condensation. Leave. I knew then it wasn't asking. It was warning. But leaving was no longer simple. Because when the door opened, the snow outside had disappeared, replaced by endless darkness stretching into infinity. And something in the darkness was moving toward me. I didn't sleep that night. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the darkness outside the door was solid, endless, like a void swallowing the snow-covered town. I tried barricading myself in the living room, but the house had other ideas. Furniture shifted silently, creating narrow corridors, trapping me in ways I didn't understand. I noticed whispers everywhere now, not just repeating my name, but my thoughts, fears, regrets. Every time I tried to concentrate, the house echoed my doubts louder, mocking me. At 3:03 a.m., the kitchen lights exploded in sparks. A smell of scorched wood filled the air. And then the floorboards under my feet began to tremble slightly, as if breathing with me. I ran to the bedroom anyway, praying the couch might offer comfort. But the mattress sagged unnaturally. The blanket had folded itself neatly across the pillow, like someone or something was waiting. I opened the notebook again. A new line had appeared. 2:17 a.m. Panicked, heart racing, still inside. The handwriting wasn't mine. Not exactly. It was cleaner, sharper, deliberate, an imitation that knew me better than I knew myself. I understood then the truth of the old man's warning at the diner in Rivière Noire. The house didn't just watch, it learned. And eventually, it becomes you. I tried reasoning with it. I spoke aloud, pleading, negotiating, begging the house to let me leave. Nothing changed. Instead, the house responded to my panic, shaping itself around my fear. Hallways stretched impossibly long. Doors that should have led outside opened into walls. Windows reflected rooms I hadn't entered yet. At 2:17 a.m., a clock in the hallway started ticking in perfect sync with my heartbeat. I followed the sound, trying to find its source. But every turn brought me back to the same spot. The living room, the couch, the open notebook. Something brushed against my arm. I whipped around. Empty. Yet the air pressed against me, warm and suffocating. I could feel the house breathing, walls expanding and contracting with each panicked gasp. Then I saw it in the mirror again. Not my reflection. Something cleaner, sharper, composed. It was standing where I had been moments before, watching me, mimicking me perfectly. I realized the house didn't just imitate me to scare me. It was learning to replace me, to move through the world in my stead. I had a choice. Keep trying to escape, or accept that it might already be me. Somewhere, watching. I ran anyway. I ran blindly, walls bending around me like they were breathing. Every step echoed too late. Every door led somewhere new. The house had no plan but to confuse me, to tire me, to teach me that resistance was useless. I stumbled into the kitchen. The notebook was on the floor, pages fluttering though there was no wind. The words shifted before my eyes, rearranging themselves. 2:17 a.m., still awake, beginning to understand. Very good. I realized then it wasn't just recording me. It was evaluating me, testing me. Every action I took was logged, analyzed, cataloged. If I slowed, it adapted. If I panicked, it learned faster. Footsteps behind me, heavier this time, not slow, not timid, not human. They matched mine exactly, but amplified, reverberating through the floorboards as though I were carrying another weight inside me. I found the front door. It should have led outside, but the hallway stretched infinitely, trees from outside casting long shadows that merged seamlessly with the interior. I tried windows, but they showed other rooms, other versions of me sitting quietly, writing in notebooks I didn't remember starting. I understood the truth in my gut, cold and final. The house didn't want to trap me. It wanted to become me, and I was its curriculum. I tried screaming. My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the walls. Every echo repeated my panic, distorted. I slammed myself against doors, but they only led to mirrored rooms, each one housing a version of me sitting calmly, watching, learning. Then I heard the whisper, soft, deliberate, but unmistakably mine. You can leave, but someone stays. I froze. The air thickened. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat. I realized the house wasn't sending warnings. It was offering bargains. I had to choose. Abandon a version of myself here to get out, or risk being absorbed entirely. The living room morphed again. A single chair appeared, old and wooden, facing me. The notebook rested on it, blank except for one line written in my hand. Sit. Decide. I wanted to flee, but my body moved toward it anyway. My heart screamed, but my legs obeyed. Every room, every corridor, every shadow. The house had learned my fear, my hesitation, my pattern. And now it was holding it all in its hands. I realized then, the true terror wasn't being trapped. It was becoming optional. I sat. The chair was cold, the notebook heavier than it looked. My hand hovered over the blank page, unsure whether I was writing for myself or for the house. Every creak in the floor, every whisper, every shadow seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then the pages filled, not with my handwriting, but something cleaner, sharper, more precise. Each letter mirrored my thoughts, my fears, my secrets. The house was finishing my sentences before I could even think them. Outside the windows, the forest no longer existed. Black nothingness stretched endlessly. And in that void, I saw forms moving, other caretakers who hadn't escaped, other versions of me frozen in different poses, repeating the same mistakes over and over. I tried to tear the notebook from the chair, but it was like ripping a part of myself away. The chair wouldn't budge. The air pressed in, heavier with every second. A voice whispered, soft but undeniable, exactly in my tone. You can leave or stay. Decide now. And I understood. The house didn't trap you. It only taught you. It learned you. And when you faltered, when hesitation came, it kept a copy and let the rest go. I made my choice. I woke outside the house. Snow crunched under my boots. The sun was rising, painting the abandoned town in pale gold. The house sat silent behind me, unchanged, still as if nothing had happened. But I felt different. My skin prickled, my breath came in shallow bursts, and the weight of exhaustion pressed down on me. I glanced at my notebook. It was in my hands, blank again. Or so it seemed. Later, back in town, I asked the locals about the house. Some smiled sadly. Some didn't answer. One old woman simply said, "Everyone who watches it leaves, but something always stays, something that looks like them." That night, I placed the notebook by my bed. Half expecting, half dreading, I opened it. On the first page, a single line appeared, written in my hand, but not by me. "We are learning. See you soon." Since then, I've avoided long drives, long nights, and empty houses. But deep down, I know it's still out there, waiting, watching, copying, and recording. Because some houses don't just observe. They live. My name is Hannah Mercer, and this happened to me when I was 29 years old, during a solo hiking trip through the remote wilderness of northern Ontario. I had rented a small, rustic cabin far from the nearest town, seeking solitude, a break from the city, and the perfect place to finish my novel. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by towering pines whose shadows stretched like long fingers across the snow. From the moment I arrived, something felt off. Not threatening exactly, but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The air was heavier here, quieter, as if the forest itself held its breath. The first night, I heard it. Faint footsteps circling the cabin, just beyond the walls. I convinced myself it was wildlife, deer or fox. But the pacing was deliberate, too measured, too precise. Each step seemed to echo inside my chest, matching my heartbeat. I tried locking the doors and windows, even checked the deadbolt twice. Yet when I lay in bed, the footsteps continued. Circling, a whisper of crunching snow just outside. And then I heard my own voice, faint but unmistakable, calling my name from somewhere beyond the walls. I wasn't alone. I convinced myself it was my imagination. After all, isolation can twist perception. I unpacked my things and tried to focus on writing, but every creak of the cabin floor or rustle of branches outside made me jump. My own reflection in the window sometimes seemed delayed, moving a fraction of a second after I did. By the second night, I began hearing whispers, fragmented words in my own voice. They didn't make sense at first. Don't go yet. Remember, the lake? I froze each time, straining to locate the source. But the cabin remained empty. Even the walls seemed to hum softly, resonating with a frequency I couldn't identify. I ventured outside once, flashlight in hand, circling the cabin to see if anyone was hiding in the woods. The snow was pristine, untouched. No footprints. Nothing. Yet when I returned inside, I noticed something chilling. Every item I had unpacked, my laptop, notebooks, even the kettle, had been moved. Slightly, deliberately, positioned differently than I remembered. The cabin was aware, and I was beginning to feel it, sensing its gaze even when I wasn't looking. By the third night, the cabin's presence had become undeniable. I could feel it watching me, even when I sat quietly at the desk, typing. The air was colder than outside, even with the heater on. Shadows stretched and warped along the walls, following me as I moved from room to room. At precisely 1:23 a.m., I heard the first full sentence in my own voice, clear and deliberate. "You shouldn't be here." I spun toward the window. The snow outside remained untouched. No footprints, no animals, nothing but the pines swaying in the wind. Yet the sound persisted, echoing around the room as if it were inside my head. I checked every door and window, locked, secure. I was alone. But the whispers continued, faster now, overlapping. "Hannah, why do you stay? Look behind you." My stomach dropped. I didn't dare move, but instinct pulled me toward the mirror on the wall. There, reflected in the dim moonlight, my figure appeared twice. Once where I stood, once a few feet behind me. The second figure mimicked me perfectly, even my nervous trembling, except its eyes were darker, hollow, and unblinking. I gasped. It smiled, and I realized the cabin didn't just watch, it copied. Fear rooted me to the spot, but curiosity, or perhaps madness, pulled me closer. I spoke aloud, hoping to break the spell. "Who are you? What do you want?" The cabin answered in whispers of my own voice, layering itself over every surface. "You can leave, but we stay. We learn." I tried to flee, running toward the door, but the layout had changed. The hallway leading to the exit stretched impossibly, twisting back into itself. Every turn returned me to the living room, to the desk, to the mirror. I noticed then that my notebook lay open on the table. Words I hadn't written appeared. 1:23 a.m. Still alive. Observed. Being learned. My blood ran cold. The shadows shifted again. The second reflection moved independently now, stepping closer to the mirror's edge, grinning. I realized it wasn't waiting for me to act. It was teaching me to act, to follow its script. I backed into a corner. The cabin's air pulsed with anticipation, warm and suffocating. I understood one terrifying fact. The cabin didn't trap people. It trained them, and eventually, it replaced them. I stayed awake the entire fifth night, unable to rest as the cabin's presence thickened around me. Every creak of the floor, every subtle whistle of wind outside felt like a calculated movement. I no longer doubted the cabin's awareness. It was alive in a way I had never experienced. At 2:17 a.m., the whispers became sentences, full, clear, and mocking. "Your heartbeat is ours. Your breath is ours. Your thoughts are ours." I clutched the notebook, hoping to ground myself in something familiar. The pages had filled again, this time describing every movement I had made that day, every sip of tea, every page written, every glance at the frozen lake outside. The cabin knew me in ways no human could. Suddenly, a cold gust slammed the front door open, snow swirling into the room. My reflection in the mirror didn't flinch. It stepped forward, reaching out, smiling with my face, but eyes empty and hollow. I realized the horrifying truth. The cabin wasn't merely copying me. It was learning my instincts, predicting my panic, anticipating my moves. The shadows deepened. The air pulsed like lungs, breathing with me, constricting me. I had become the experiment, the subject, the audience, and the cabin was the predator. I tried to escape. I ran to the front door, but it led only to another room, cabin had shifted again, hallways bending unnaturally, ceilings stretching, doors opening into impossible spaces. The whispers chased me, repeating my thoughts before I could articulate them. I screamed, pounding on walls, screaming my name to anchor myself, to prove I was still real. But every sound I made echoed back at me, distorted, slowed, or sped up. My own voice was being used against me. Then I noticed a new detail. The reflections in the window no longer mirrored reality. They acted independently, mimicking actions I had only imagined doing. They weren't just mirrors. They were copies, practicing, learning, observing. I ducked behind the desk, hoping the cabin would leave me be. But the air grew heavier, warmer, suffocating. My own reflection appeared behind me in the polished surface of the desk, smiling, whispering, "You can leave, but a part stays." I understood that the cabin didn't imprison you physically. It trapped pieces of your mind, your identity, and every fear you carried. And it had decided which pieces it wanted. I had to fight. I had to survive. But the cabin, it was patient. By the seventh night, the cabin's influence was nearly total. Every movement I made felt guided, anticipated, mirrored. Even my breathing seemed orchestrated by the walls themselves. The whispers had grown louder, overlapping my own thoughts, layering themselves into my perception of reality. I approached the mirror again, heart hammering. My reflection wasn't alone. Behind it, shadows formed silhouettes of previous caretakers I hadn't seen in person, frozen mid-motion, faces pale, eyes hollow, expressions of silent terror. They mimicked me, learned from me, waiting for the right moment to step out. The notebook lay open on the floor, its pages scrawled rapidly in handwriting I didn't recognize. Yet each word captured my exact fear. 2:17 a.m. Still alive, still learning, still ours. I realized then the cabin wasn't trying to harm me in the conventional sense. It was absorbing me, my mind, my reflexes, my fear, until it could replicate me fully. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candle. The reflection in the mirror grinned, showing teeth I had never seen in myself, and whispered with my voice, "It's time to decide." I knew then that leaving was impossible, not entirely. The cabin wouldn't release me unscathed. Something would always remain, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to escape or survive. I tried reasoning, pleading aloud with the cabin, but it didn't answer in words. It answered in motion. The walls shifted, narrowing the space, forcing me toward the desk and the notebook. The floorboards creaked under invisible weight. My own reflections in windows and mirrors moved independently, circling me, testing my resolve. The air grew thick and warm, almost suffocating. I could feel the cabin breathing, pulsing in time with my racing heart. The shadows extended their reach, curling around my legs, pressing against my arms, yet they offered no harm, only observation, study, control. I realized the house wanted more than me trapped. It wanted me learned, mapped, folded into its walls like another layer of wallpaper. The notebook glowed faintly. Pages flipped open, forming words I had not written. Choose, leave with memory, or stay complete. I backed toward the front door. It opened, revealing black nothingness stretching endlessly outside. Every instinct screamed to run, but every fear screamed to stay. And then my reflection in the mirror stepped forward, past the glass, hands reaching for me. I had to make a choice. But the cabin, it was patient. I stood frozen in front of the notebook. The pages weren't blank anymore. They were filled with my handwriting, yet precise, flawless, as though the cabin itself had learned to imitate me perfectly. Every thought I had that day was transcribed. Every fear mapped in delicate, cruel detail. The reflections around me moved independently, stepping closer, circling me, whispering fragments of my own voice. Stay. Leave. Stay. Leave. The repetition pressed against my mind, twisting it, eroding my certainty. I realized the cabin's true power. It didn't need to trap me physically. It trapped my essence, my identity, my fear. It had already taken the parts it wanted, and the rest of me would be molded, observed, folded into its walls until it could exist without me entirely. I tried to flee. I ran toward the front door, but it opened into an infinite black void. The shadows shifted, coiling around me, guiding me back to the center of the cabin. My heart hammered, breath freezing in my lungs as the reflections in the mirrors grinned, perfectly synchronized, perfectly mine. A whisper, sharp and deliberate, echoed from every surface. Decide. Or we decide for you. I understood. The cabin didn't kill, it replaced. And I had only moments to act before it finished the process. I chose. I grabbed the notebook and flung it at the mirror, hoping to break the connection, to shatter the reflection. The glass cracked, but the reflection smiled wider, stepping closer still. My own voice echoed through the cabin. We are learning. We are patient. The walls shuddered. Shadows surged, coiling around me, pressing, enveloping, suffocating. I ran blindly, finally throwing myself through the front door, or what I thought was the front door, and collapsed into the snow outside. The cabin stood silent, serene. Yet I could feel it still learning, still observing. My notebook was in my hands, blank again. But I knew the truth. A piece of me remained inside, mapped and memorized. A template for the next visitor, the next caretaker. I returned to civilization, shaken, sleepless, haunted. I avoid cabins now, woods, anything remotely isolated. Yet sometimes at night, when I close my eyes, I hear whispers, my own voice repeating, echoing, calling me back. Some places don't just watch. They learn. They keep a piece of you, and they wait. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened to me 3 years ago during a photography assignment along the rugged coasts of Nova Scotia. I had been sent to document old lighthouses, many of which had long been abandoned, standing like silent sentinels over the crashing Atlantic waves. One in particular, perched on a cliff at the edge of a small fishing village, caught my attention. Its paint was peeling, its windows clouded with salt and neglect. Yet there was something alive about it. I arrived just before sunset, the sky painted in bruised purple and deep crimson. The air was thick with fog, curling along the rocks like fingers, and the wind carried the faint tang of seaweed and decay. As I stepped inside, the wooden floors groaned under my boots. The spiral staircase wound upward into darkness, each step echoing like a heartbeat. By nightfall, I had set up my camera gear in the lantern room at the top. That's when I first heard it. A whisper, faint but deliberate, curling through the air. Not human, not animal, but unmistakably directed at me. My name. Ethan. I froze. My camera fell from my hands with a clatter. The lighthouse wasn't empty. I convinced myself it was the wind, echoing through the cracked walls, exaggerating natural sounds. I climbed the staircase to the lantern room again, camera in hand, trying to document the structure before retreating for the night. But the whisper followed me, soft, deliberate, familiar. Ethan, why are you here? I stopped mid-step. The room was empty, yet the air itself seemed thick, almost viscous, pressing against my skin. Shadows danced along the walls, thrown by my flashlight. but they moved strangely, lingering longer than the light should allow. I set my tripod near the railing, pointing out to the storm-lashed cliffs below. When I glanced through the lens, I saw something impossible. A shadow at the far edge of the rocks, tall, hunched, watching, though no one could have survived that climb. By midnight, the whispers had multiplied. They weren't just my name anymore. They repeated thoughts I hadn't voiced aloud, doubts about my career, fears about my life, memories I thought long buried. The lighthouse was alive, and it knew me better than anyone ever had. By the third night, the whispers had grown clearer, sharper, almost conversational. They didn't just echo my thoughts. They suggested actions, prompted memories, even questioned my sanity. I could feel the walls breathing around me, the floorboards trembling with a rhythm that matched my own pulse. At precisely 1:17 a.m., I heard my name again, this time followed by a command. Look into the lens. I turned my camera slowly, hesitant, my heart hammering. In the viewfinder, the cliff outside appeared different. The shadow I had seen before now moved unnaturally, stretching impossibly, leaning toward the lighthouse as if aware of my presence. The wind howled, but it carried words. Words I recognized, phrases I had whispered to myself days ago, spoken only in the solitude of my thoughts. I felt a presence behind me. The lighthouse itself seemed to pulse, almost alive, its beams of light slicing through fog like skeletal fingers reaching into my mind. The shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, almost forming shapes, almost forming faces. Something was learning me, watching me, waiting. And the lighthouse didn't want me to leave. I tried to leave, descending the spiral staircase, but each step felt heavier, slower, as if the lighthouse itself resisted me. The whispers followed, repeating every fear I had spoken aloud that day. Doubts about my choices, regrets about relationships, insecurities about my work. I reached the bottom floor and saw something impossible. The front door, which I had locked hours ago, now stood open. Beyond it was not the night sky or the cliff. It was darkness so thick it seemed solid, absorbing the light from my flashlight. The lighthouse had changed its reality. I glanced back. The spiral staircase stretched upward infinitely, shadows crawling along its edges like sentient fingers. My own reflection appeared in a polished brass railing. Only it moved independently, mimicking me, but with subtle differences. A tilt of the head I hadn't done, a smile I didn't remember forming. I realized the lighthouse wasn't just haunted. It was sentient. It fed on my fears, learned my habits, anticipated my moves. Every sound, every step, every heartbeat, it cataloged all of it, folding me into its design. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in my ears. You cannot leave, but you can stay. And a cold dread settled into my bones. I might not survive leaving. By the fifth night, exhaustion had begun to blur my perception. My body ached from climbing the spiral staircase again and again, chasing the whispers, chasing shadows that never fully revealed themselves. The air inside the lighthouse felt alive, thick and metallic, pressing down on my chest with every breath. The whispers became more urgent, almost demanding. Ethan, look closer. Listen carefully. I picked up my camera and aimed it at the lantern room window. The cliff below had changed. The shadow figure was gone, replaced by faint outlines of human shapes frozen mid-step, staring up at the lighthouse. I couldn't tell if they were real or projections, memories, or warnings. Then came a new sound, a low hum from the lighthouse lamp itself, vibrating through the floors and walls. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. and I realized with a shiver that it was syncing with me, observing me, dictating my pace. Every creak, every gust of wind outside, every shadow, controlled. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was alive, conscious, aware of every detail of my body and mind. It was learning me, molding me, folding me into its history of isolation, fear, and obsession. I understood then that escape would not be simple, not even close. I tried to anchor myself to reality by photographing the lighthouse interior, hoping to document proof, to rationalize the fear. But the camera betrayed me. Images distorted, reflections showing scenes I had not seen, shadows forming figures I could not identify. Even the photos seemed alive, changing subtly when I wasn't looking. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, layering my own thoughts with echoes of voices I couldn't place. Past visitors, lost photographers, maybe even the lighthouse itself speaking in the guise of my own mind. I stumbled into the spiral staircase again, drawn upward by some force I could not resist. Each step groaned, and the walls seemed to contract around me, guiding my movements. My reflection appeared in the brass railing, now clearly separate from my own motions, watching, judging, smiling with eyes that weren't mine. Then, a chilling realization. The lighthouse didn't just feed on fear, it studied behavior, analyzed reactions, and adapted. Every instinct I had, every hesitation, every thought, it recorded. It was building a blueprint of me, mapping my mind, predicting my actions, learning how I could be manipulated. I stopped at the lantern room door, breathing ragged. The whispers grew insistent. Decide. Stay. Leave. Choose. And I knew the choice wasn't mine alone. By the seventh night, the lighthouse had taken full command of the space. The walls pulsed as if breathing, and the air was dense, pressing against my skin, making each movement a deliberate struggle. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling along the spiral staircase, forming shapes that seemed almost human, almost alive. I reached the lantern room, my hands shaking, breath ragged. The lamp was brighter than ever, its light slicing through the fog outside in sharp, blinding beams. But the shadow I had seen before was no longer outside. It was inside. A dark silhouette leaning against the railing, eerily still, yet perfectly aware of my presence. The whispers surged, overlapping and urgent. Stay or leave, but a piece remains either way. I glanced at the camera. The screen showed not what I expected, but scenes from my own memories, moments I hadn't shared, fears I had kept hidden even from myself. The lighthouse had learned me completely, my voice, my expressions, my inner anxieties, and now it used them to manipulate me. I realized with terror that leaving wouldn't free me. The lighthouse didn't just observe, it absorbed, copied, and preserved. Part of me was already inside, woven into its structure. I had to act fast, but the shadows pressed closer. The whispers grew louder, and my pulse matched the lighthouse's beat. Panic surged, but instinct forced me to remain calm. I grabbed my camera and focused it on the silhouette, hoping to document proof, to assert some control. Yet the screen didn't show the figure. Instead, it projected a distorted version of me. My own face twisted in fear, eyes hollow and wide, hands trembling but reaching outward. The whispers overlapped, layering in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat. Decide. Stay. Leave. But part of you will remain. I realized the lighthouse was testing me. It wasn't trying to harm me physically. It was teaching, probing, mapping my mind, folding my fear into its walls like a puzzle piece. Each hesitation, each thought, each breath was being recorded, copied, learned. A cold draft swept through the lantern room, extinguishing the small lamps I had lit. Only the main beacon remained, casting long, skeletal shadows across the walls. The reflections in the brass railing moved independently now, circling me, mimicking actions I hadn't made yet, anticipating my panic before it surfaced. I understood the horrifying truth. Escape was possible, but only if I outsmarted the lighthouse. Any mistake, and it would claim me, learning me completely, folding my essence into its history of isolation and obsession. I had to act carefully. By the 9th night, I felt both hunted and studied. The lighthouse had adapted to me completely. Every shadow, every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside was synchronized with my heartbeat, as if the structure itself was alive and aware of my presence. The whispers were no longer words. They were commands, memories, and reflections of my own fears, looping endlessly in my mind. I stood in the lantern room, staring down at the jagged cliffs below. The shadow figure had vanished once more, replaced by multiple faint outlines, frozen mid-step, staring up at me with hollow, empty eyes. It was a gallery of previous victims, or perhaps distorted projections of myself. Then the reflections appeared, dozens of them, each moving independently, circling me, predicting my panic before I could act. I realized that the lighthouse didn't just want to trap me. It wanted to replicate me, to study me, to fold my very identity into its structure. I felt pieces of myself slipping away with every heartbeat, memories and fears cataloged and absorbed. The whispers pressed on, insistent. Decide, before we decide for you. I understood then that survival would require more than fleeing. It would require outsmarting something that had already mapped my mind completely. I made my move. I grabbed my camera and aimed at the main beacon, not to photograph it, but to disrupt it, to shine its own light back into itself, hoping to confuse the structure, if such a thing was possible. The lighthouse groaned in response, shadows twisting violently along the walls, reflections faltering, hesitating. I ran down the spiral staircase, the whispers now overlapping into a deafening roar. My thoughts, my memories, every fear I had, repeated in a chorus. The front door appeared at the bottom, opening to the night air once more. Fog swirling like fingers trying to pull me back. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight through, falling onto the wet rocks below. I scrambled to the edge of the cliff, breathing ragged, watching the lighthouse loom above, serene yet malevolent. I was free, but I knew it had kept pieces of me. My fears, my reactions, my very self had been cataloged, recorded, folded into its walls. To this day, I avoid lighthouses, cliffs, anything isolated. Sometimes, in the wind, I hear it again, a whisper of my own voice calling me back. The lighthouse doesn't just watch. It learns, and it waits. My name is Clara Thompson, and this happened the summer after I graduated college. I had been traveling across New Brunswick, documenting historic inns and small-town architecture for a photography blog. One evening, driving along a nearly empty coastal highway, I noticed a sign barely visible through the fog. Havens Rest Inn, vacancies available. It was small, unassuming, and looked almost frozen in time, with peeling paint and a faint, golden glow from the windows. I parked my car and approached, feeling an inexplicable pull, like the inn itself was aware I had arrived. The door creaked loudly as I entered, and the smell hit me immediately. Old wood, musty carpets, and faintly something metallic, almost like blood. A bell jingled as I stepped inside, and I found the lobby deserted, yet warm. the fireplace crackling softly despite no visible logs. As I explored, I realized something was off. The decor didn't match the time period. Antique furniture sat beside modern amenities, yet the layout of the inn kept shifting. Hallways seemed longer than physically possible. Doors appeared where none existed, and a soft whisper echoed from above. "Clara, you're expected." I froze. My own name, carried on the stale air, sounded both inviting and threatening. I wasn't sure who or what had spoken. I wandered down the narrow hallway toward the sound of the whispers, camera in hand, documenting every detail. The wallpaper looked old, faded, yet certain panels seemed new, freshly painted. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, as if the building itself were amplifying my presence. A door at the end of the hallway opened on its own, revealing a room bathed in soft candlelight. Inside, a solitary bed sat neatly made, though the sheets shimmered strangely, reflecting movement that wasn't mine. I stepped closer, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Clara, it's time. Don't leave yet." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The air thickened, pressing against me. I realized the windows showed nothing but darkness, yet I could hear faint sounds of wind, waves, and distant voices murmuring my name. I turned to leave, but the hallway behind me had changed. Doors that hadn't existed appeared, walls stretched longer than before, and my own footsteps echoed ahead of me, perfectly timed, but not mine. I began to understand the horrifying truth. The inn was alive, shifting, aware of me, and not all that it showed was real. By the third night, the inn had begun to assert itself fully. Every hallway I walked stretched impossibly. Doors appeared and vanished as I approached, and the faint whispers were no longer words. They were memories, suggestions, and commands, speaking directly to my mind. I entered the dining room, expecting empty tables, yet found them meticulously set for guests who weren't there. Chairs moved slightly, as if nudged by invisible hands. The air smelled of freshly baked bread mixed with decay, a contradiction that made my stomach churn. I lifted my camera, trying to capture evidence, but the images were distorted. The tables seemed to stretch toward me, chairs warped like shadows, and the walls pulsed subtly, breathing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Then I heard it clearly, a single voice calling, "Clara, come closer." It wasn't a threat, but it was impossible to ignore. My legs moved of their own accord, climbing the narrow stairs to the second floor, following a light that wasn't visible. Each step echoed, yet I could hear dozens of footsteps ahead of me, perfectly mimicking mine. I realized the inn didn't just observe, it learned. Every fear, every hesitation, every instinct was cataloged. I wasn't exploring, I was being guided, studied, folded into the inn's design like another piece of its history. I reached the second floor, the narrow corridor stretching endlessly in both directions. Doors lined each side, some open, some closed, but each one shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. Shadows pooled unnaturally at the edges of my vision, moving independently of any light source. At the far end, a faint glow drew me toward a room. The door opened silently, revealing a bedroom with a mirror, bed neatly made, and a small desk. On the desk sat a journal, its pages blank, yet I felt it calling to me. Write or stay. I hesitated, but instinct forced me closer. As I touched the journal, words began appearing on the pages in handwriting that wasn't mine. "We see you. We know you. You belong here." The shadows shifted behind me in the reflection. My own image appeared in the mirror, moving independently, staring at me with hollow, lifeless eyes. I spun around. Nothing was there. But the whispers persisted, overlapping my thoughts, repeating memories only I knew, fears only I had ever spoken aloud. I understood then that the inn didn't trap bodies, it trapped minds. And it had already begun folding mine into its impossible shifting halls. Pitoshi, by the fifth night, exhaustion and fear blurred my sense of reality. Each step I took through the inn was heavier, more deliberate, as if the building itself resisted my movement. The whispers had multiplied, overlapping into a chorus of voices, repeating every doubt and secret I had ever held. I could no longer tell which were my thoughts and which belonged to the inn. I entered the lounge, expecting emptiness. Yet the furniture had rearranged itself. Chairs faced each other in unnatural alignment, shadows pooling beneath them as if waiting. A faint cold draft brushed my neck, carrying words I had never spoken aloud. "Clara, don't leave. We're not finished with you." I tried documenting it with my camera, but each photo showed something impossible. Shadows twisted into faces, walls stretched beyond reason, and in some frames, I saw multiple versions of myself, all frozen mid-motion, all staring back. The inn was alive, and it was studying me. Every hesitation, every panic, every instinct was cataloged. It wasn't malevolent in the way I expected. It was patient, intelligent, methodical, waiting for me to unravel completely before making its next move. By this point, I understood one thing. I wasn't merely visiting the inn. I was becoming part of it. I decided to confront the inn, moving toward the grand staircase at the center of the building. The steps creaked under my weight, echoing unnaturally, though I could hear dozens of other footsteps ahead of me, perfectly synchronized, though no one was there. The walls pulsated subtly, breathing with a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat, and I felt my body growing heavy, resisting each motion. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched impossibly far, lined with doors I had never seen before. Each door quivered slightly, almost alive, as if beckoning me to enter. I paused, and my reflection appeared in a polished railing, moving independently, mimicking gestures I hadn't made, tilting its head in curiosity, grinning in ways I could not. A low whisper echoed from every corner. "Stay, or leave. But a piece of you remains either way." I realized then that the inn did not just trap people, it replicated them. Every fear, every memory, every instinct I had was cataloged, stored, and studied, woven into the fabric of the building itself. It didn't matter if I left, a part of me was already there, folded into its history of obsession and isolation. I had to act quickly, or I would become a permanent resident, not in body, but in mind. By the seventh night, the inn had fully revealed its nature. The walls seemed to breathe, stretching and contracting subtly as I moved. Shadows elongated unnaturally along the floors and ceilings, curling toward me like living fingers. Each whisper I heard was no longer just words. It was a probe, a calculated attempt to unravel my mind. I approached a door at the far end of the hallway that glowed faintly, a soft amber light spilling through the crack. I hesitated, but instinct drew me closer. As I stepped inside, the room shifted impossibly. The bed seemed miles away, the ceiling stretched upward, and the mirror reflected not just me, but dozens of past visitors, frozen mid-action, staring silently. The whispers intensified, overlapping my own thoughts. "You belong here. Stay with us. Never leave." I could feel the inn folding my fears into its walls. My heartbeat quickened, my palms grew sweaty, and yet I felt an almost magnetic pull, guiding me further in, deeper into its shifting corridors. It wasn't trying to harm me. It wanted me to participate, to accept that a part of me would remain forever. I understood the horrifying truth. The inn didn't just trap bodies or minds. It harvested essence, shaping each visitor into part of its history. I stepped deeper into the room, trying to anchor myself with my camera. But every photograph I took warped reality further. The bed appeared to move subtly, shadows shifted independently, and in some frames, I saw multiple versions of myself, each frozen in terror, each staring back. The whispers now overlapped with laughter, low and subtle, echoing from every wall, floorboard, and ceiling. "You're almost ours. Just a little longer." I realized the inn was sentient. It didn't just observe. It manipulated, tested, and folded every fear, every hesitation, every instinct into its labyrinthine halls. It knew my patterns, anticipated my reactions, and adapted in real time. A door slammed somewhere far down the corridor, startling me. I turned and saw dozens of doors opening and closing simultaneously, each revealing rooms filled with shadows that mimicked me, echoing movements I hadn't made yet. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to outsmart it. Escape was possible, but only if I played by its rules without succumbing to its psychological grasp. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the choices ahead, knowing the inn was ready to test me completely. By the 9th night, the inn's manipulations had become relentless. Every hallway stretched impossibly, doors opened to rooms that shouldn't exist, and the shadows now moved with purpose, anticipating my every step. I realized I was no longer exploring. I was navigating a living entity that had absorbed part of my mind. I approached the central lounge, the faint golden glow I had first seen now pulsating, almost like a heartbeat. The whispers swelled, a chorus overlapping my thoughts, repeating fears I had long buried. "Stay. Become one of us. Never leave." I looked into a mirror and froze. My reflection moved independently, tilting its head, grinning, and mouthing words I hadn't spoken. "We've learned you." Dozens of reflections surrounded me in the glass, each frozen in terror, yet eerily aware. I understood then the horrifying truth. The inn didn't just trap people, it replicated them, folding fears, memories, and essence into its shifting halls, creating an ever-growing tapestry of those who had come before. I had only one chance: escape without succumbing to its pull. I had to navigate a path the inn hadn't anticipated, a risk that could leave me lost forever, or worse, partially absorbed. I made my move. With steady breaths, I focused on the hallway I had first entered, forcing myself to ignore the whispers and the shifting doors. The shadows writhed, twisting along walls and floors, trying to distract me. But I ran, feet pounding against the pulsing floorboards. The golden light flickered behind me, growing dimmer with every step, yet I could feel the inn's consciousness reaching, pulling at me, testing my resolve. Finally, the front door appeared, just as it had the night I arrived. I threw it open and stumbled into the foggy night, gasping for air, the faint chill of the coastal wind grounding me in reality. I dared a glance back. The inn's lights had dimmed, shadows gone. Yet a low whisper reached me on the wind. "Part of you remains, and we will wait." I escaped with my life, but part of me, my fears, my thoughts, had been left behind. I avoided inns, abandoned buildings, and even small towns for months afterward. Sometimes, in the distance, I swear I see a faint golden glow in the fog, beckoning me, whispering my name. The vanishing inn doesn't forget, and it never truly lets go. My name is Daniel McKay, and this happened during a solo road trip through northern Ontario in the dead of winter. The roads were empty, blanketed in ice and snow, stretching endlessly through frozen forests. I was driving to a remote cabin I had rented, eager for solitude and photography, unaware of how that isolation would turn into a nightmare. Around midnight, a thick fog rolled in, blurring the edges of the road and swallowing the beams of my headlights. I slowed, heart pounding, and noticed a figure standing at the roadside. A man in a dark coat, face obscured, completely still despite the wind whipping snow around him. I honked. He didn't move. I flashed my lights. He didn't move. And then, impossibly, he vanished. I shook my head, thinking fatigue was making me hallucinate, and continued down the icy highway. That's when I saw them. Faint shapes in the snow just at the edge of the fog. Footprints leading nowhere, appearing and disappearing in seconds, as if the snow itself was alive. A voice whispered through the wind, chilling me to the bone. "Don't stop, or you'll join us." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the car engine roaring against the unnatural silence that followed, realizing the road itself was alive, observing me, testing me. I tried to focus on the road, but the fog thickened, swallowing everything around me. The shapes at the edges of the road flickered, sometimes human, sometimes not, and always just out of reach. My headlights caught glimpses of movement. Figures darting behind trees, shadows shifting in impossible ways. Then the car radio crackled to life. Static at first, then a faint whisper repeating my name. "Daniel, don't stop, don't stop." I slammed my foot on the accelerator, snow spraying in all directions. But the road seemed endless, curling and bending unnaturally. The fog pressed against the windshield like a physical weight, making each breath inside the car fog up my visor. I glanced in the rearview mirror. At first, it was empty. But then I saw them. Figures standing in the middle of the road behind me, motionless, yet impossibly fast. Each time I looked back, they were closer. My own reflection in the glass seemed to move independently, a pale, hollow-eyed version of myself, staring back with a grin I hadn't made. I realized with terror that this wasn't just a road accident waiting to happen. The road itself had become a predator, alive and aware, feeding on fear, learning my reactions, and guiding me towards something I didn't want to find. By the third night, the road had become a labyrinth. Every turn seemed longer than it should be, every bend revealing more fog, more shadows, more shapes just out of reach. My speedometer spun, but the numbers didn't feel real. Time itself seemed distorted. I realized I could no longer trust the landscape. Snowbanks appeared impossibly high, trees bent unnaturally over the road, and the fog clung to the car like an animal, pressing in on all sides. Then I saw it again. The figure, a man in a dark coat, standing in the center of the lane. But now there were more, dozens of them, faint outlines barely visible through the snowstorm. They didn't move, yet they were everywhere, appearing at impossible angles, on the roadside, in the trees, even reflected in my headlights, as if the snow itself was forming their shapes. The radio hissed again, but this time the whispers were clearer, overlapping with the wind. "Daniel, keep moving, or you will join the frozen." Panic surged, yet instinct pushed me forward. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened, and I realized the horrifying truth. The road was alive, intelligent, and it was learning me. Every reaction cataloged, every fear observed. I had to survive. I had no other choice. I continued, breath ragged, heart pounding, but the figures multiplied with every mile. The fog thickened into a wall, swallowing the headlights entirely. The snow under my tires seemed to shift, sometimes soft, sometimes solid, as if guiding me, herding me towards something unknown. My reflection in the rearview mirror twisted again, pale, hollow-eyed, a distorted version of myself that moved independently, grinning cruelly. It whispered my fears back to me, twisting them into commands. Stop, give up, join us. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, yet the road stretched endlessly ahead. The wind carried voices, laughter, and whispers layered over my own thoughts, blurring reality. Shapes moved at the periphery of my vision, impossible angles, bodies appearing and vanishing in seconds, as if the road itself had become sentient. Then, up ahead, I noticed a faint glow. An inn? A cabin? I couldn't tell, but instinct screamed that it was my only chance. The figures hesitated, frozen in place, as if acknowledging the next step. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping into one chilling chorus. Daniel, you cannot leave. The frozen will claim you. I knew then that escape would demand more than speed. It required cunning, courage, and every ounce of focus I had left. By the fifth night, exhaustion weighed on me, but I couldn't stop. Every mile felt longer than the last, as if the road itself resisted my escape. The fog thickened, swirling like icy tendrils around the car. Shapes emerged again, figures half-formed, pale and hollow-eyed, flickering in and out of existence. They didn't walk, didn't run. They simply appeared, blocking my path before vanishing, leaving only their footprints frozen in the snow. The radio crackled with whispers again. You cannot escape. You belong to the frozen. I gritted my teeth, refusing to listen. I could feel the road learning my reactions, anticipating my every move. Every time I swerved or slowed, the figures multiplied, mirrored in the fog and snow, as if mocking my attempts. My pulse raced, breath ragged in the freezing air of the car, and I realized something terrifying. The road wasn't just alive, it was hunting, adapting, planning. Through the fog, a faint light appeared ahead. My instincts told me it was a cabin, possibly my salvation. Yet, as I neared it, the snow shifted under my tires, almost like a hand trying to push me off course. The figures began to move in perfect unison, flanking the road, pushing me toward the glowing light with silent menace. I understood then that my survival depended on facing the unknown, not just fleeing. I gritted my teeth and forced my foot down on the accelerator. The figures mirrored my movements instantly, appearing on the sides, ahead, even in my peripheral vision. Relentless and unnerving. The fog thickened, almost solid, pressing against the car like a living entity, constricting me, testing me. The wind howled through the trees, like voices screaming my name, merging with the radio whispers. Daniel, stop. Give in. Become one of us. The light of the cabin ahead flickered in and out as the snow shifted unnaturally beneath my tires. I realized the road was not a path, but a trap. A sentient predator guiding me to a final destination. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I knew turning back meant death, or worse, joining the frozen figures in eternal torment. My own reflection in the rearview mirror grinned at me, but it wasn't me. It moved independently, mocking my panic, anticipating my reactions. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the road itself, a chilling synchronization. I had no choice but to trust the glow ahead, to push through the fear and hope that my willpower could outmatch whatever malevolent intelligence governed this frozen nightmare. By the seventh night, the cabin's glow ahead felt both like salvation and a trap. The fog had thickened to an almost solid wall, and the figures had multiplied, forming a moving corridor of pale, hollow-eyed shapes. They didn't walk. They glided over the snow, silent yet impossibly fast, always appearing just out of reach, just behind me. My headlights barely penetrated the swirling fog, and the snow under my tires shifted unpredictably, as if the road itself was alive, a predator testing my resolve. The whispers had grown into a deafening chorus, overlapping with my own heartbeat. "Daniel, stop. Belong. The frozen await." I forced myself to focus on the light ahead. The figures mirrored my every move, anticipating every swerve, every press of the gas pedal. My reflection in the rearview mirror grinned at me, a cruel doppelganger, moving independently, taunting me with my own fear. With every passing second, I realized the horrifying truth. The road wasn't just sentient, it was intelligent. It wasn't merely trying to stop me. It wanted to break me, to fold my mind into its frozen labyrinth alongside the other lost souls it had claimed over the years. The cabin was my only hope, but reaching it meant outsmarting something that had already mapped my fear. I pushed harder on the accelerator, weaving through the snow and ice with precision I didn't know I had. The figures mirrored my movements, appearing on the roadside, in the trees, even briefly inside the fog before vanishing. The whispers merged into screams, overlapping with the howl of the wind and the crunch of tires on ice. "You cannot leave. Join us. The frozen claim all." The cabin's glow intensified ahead, a tiny beacon in the endless white void. The road beneath me shifted unpredictably, almost as if it were alive, attempting to slow me, divert me, or throw me off. My hands shook, yet I held firm, my eyes locked on the only source of hope I could see. My reflection in the mirror grinned cruelly one last time before fading, replaced by darkness. The figures hesitated for a split second, giving me the opening I needed. My heart pounded, breath ragged, snow whipping against the car, as I drove straight toward the cabin, every instinct screaming at me that the next seconds would determine whether I survived or became part of the frozen legion. I realized that the road didn't just test reflexes. It tested the will to survive. By the 9th night, I was on the brink of exhaustion. But the cabin's glow beckoned like a lifeline. The snowstorm raged around me, and the fog thickened into an almost tangible wall. The pale, hollow-eyed figures glided alongside, their numbers seemingly infinite. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw multiple versions of myself, frozen in terror, trapped in reflections that mimicked my every move. The whispers had turned into a cacophony of voices, each overlapping my own thoughts, repeating my fears, my doubts, my regrets. "Daniel, stop. Belong. The frozen await." The road stretched impossibly ahead, yet I saw the faint outline of the cabin's door. The snow beneath my tires shifted unpredictably, almost alive, as if testing whether I was worthy of escape. My pulse raced, every nerve in my body screaming that the next seconds would decide my fate. I pressed on, refusing to glance behind. Each flicker of the fog revealed more figures, more distorted reflections. But I focused on the only path that mattered, the light of the cabin ahead. This was my last chance, my final test against a sentient, malevolent winter landscape that had claimed so many before me. Finally, I reached the cabin, skidding to a halt in the snow. The figures stopped at the edge of the light, wavering, their forms flickering like mist. The whispers surged one last time, overlapping into a single, chilling command. "You cannot escape. Part of you will remain." I threw open the car door and sprinted toward the cabin. The warmth inside hit me like a wave, and the door slammed shut behind me. The fog and figures vanished instantly, as if the outside world had never existed. I collapsed, trembling, my breath ragged, the snowstorm muffled to a whisper. Even then, I felt it. The road's awareness lingering, tugging at the edges of my mind. Part of me had been left behind, a fragment absorbed into the frozen labyrinth, a reminder that the road didn't release its prey completely. The cabin, warm and quiet, was my refuge. But I knew the highway beyond would wait, patient, sentient, hunting for the next traveler foolish enough to enter its frozen domain. I survived. But I will never forget the road, the frozen road that tests, learns, and never forgets. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the faint whisper of ice and snow calling my name. As the darkness settles over the remote corners of Canada, we've witnessed horrors that are far from mere legends. 7 stories, 7 true encounters, each one a glimpse into the unknown. The vanishing inn that folds minds into its shifting halls, the frozen road that hunts with a sentient chill, and countless others lurking in forgotten small towns, abandoned buildings, and icy forests. These tales remind us that fear is not always loud. It can be subtle, patient, and intelligent. Shadows that watch, whispers that follow, and roads or halls that bend reality itself are the quiet predators of the night. Each story tested courage, endurance, and sanity. And some left fragments of their victims behind, preserved in the eerie embrace of the unknown. Whether it's a figure at the edge of your vision, a whisper calling your name, or a road that seems to stretch forever, the truth is clear. The dark corners of the world are never empty. They are alive, observing, and waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.